might get into a scrape.
Oh.
This week on Videogame Nation, get out your chunky Nokias and type LOL. It's our top 10 most influential games of the early 2000s. Dan remembers the franchise that taught us how to make our own Guantanamo Bay.
Naturally, human nature intervened, and we all ended up devising ways to torture them instead.
Aoife climbs into the armour of a legendary space marine.
You pilot some vehicles and you save the galaxy. Done.
I visit the fantasy phenomenon that redefined the words multiplayer, massive and grinding. And our panel of games journos chart the final decade where people said search engine and used phone books.
You expect the levelling systems, you expect the perks, but it was that brought it in.
That's this week on Videogame Nation. Hello television friends, high def, high five. The 2000s, 10 years of extreme confusion. It was the year where terror became a brand name, where countries went to war with other countries to find weapons that didn't exist. But don't worry, because while all the blood was spilled, Bob the Builder had a #1 hit single. He asked the world, can we fix it? And the answer was no. In gaming, the rise of YouTube meant nobody would ever have to keep their opinions to themselves again. And tech devs went a strange new direction when the pure horsepower of the PS3 and Xbox 360 battled the Wii's ability to harness the human wrist. Today we're going to have a look at the top 10 most influential games of that very strange decade. These aren't necessarily the best, they're just the ones that changed the industry for the longest. Up first, the game that made you God, but in a casual way. Here's The Sims.
You know those people who are really annoying, right? Who say like, oh, video games are such a waste of time, and why don't you go out and play tennis for real and drive your car, blah, 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 blah. Well, normally, right, I hate those people, and but with The Sims, like, seriously, why don't you just go out and just live your life? Like, if your idea of a good time is like, you know, getting a new bookshelf and then like making a sandwich, just do that, just make a sandwich. I really don't get The Sims, I'm afraid.
I think secretly people are all real control freaks, and they like to think that they're not control freaks or that they're not secretly evil and like messing with people, but they want to be able to do it in a safe way where there aren't repercussions of some guy perhaps turning up at your door saying please stop setting fire to his house, because it's not funny.
It allows us to kind of explore the darker elements of our wish to control other people's lives, but in a safe environment. So like, in real life, you'd probably get arrested for bricking someone into a kitchen until they wet themselves. But yeah, that's fine in The Sims. It's fine to build a swimming pool with no steps so people just drown. That in real life, that, you know, you'd probably get into trouble for doing that. So it allows us to kind of explore these darker elements of our personalities with these poor social crash test dummies.
When I first got the game, it was fun because you could pretty much do anything you wanted to do. I mean, there were simulations all throughout the 90s and 80s. We're looking at, like, you know, you could be like in fighter jets, or you could be in planes, trains, automobiles, all kinds of different things. This is the first time you actually be a person. You could actually simulate people doing things. And the customization as well, like, look at the customization options in all different games you play today. You customize pretty much anything. You could create some pretty disturbing things.
It sort of invented the idea of the dollhouse as a genre, and who knew that was going to be so captivating and just rewarding to watch little virtual human people grow inside your computer.
I don't want to play a game where I have to manage and monitor a pretend person's bladder levels. If you do, get help.
The Sims was supposed to be about caring for your virtual gibberish spouting inhabitants, but naturally human nature intervened and we all ended up devising ways to torture them instead. But that's what happens when you afford players the freedom to play God. Everyone starts with good intentions, but inevitably ends up going full Old Testament. In that regard, Grand Theft Auto could be considered a God game, albeit one where you're Old Testament God from the start. A vengeful, immortal killing machine who punishes the smallest of transgressions with swift, bloody death. The 21st century witnessed GTA's triumphant transformation from trashy top-down caper into peerless three-dimensional open world that let our god complexes run riot like never before and kickstarted a new era for sandbox gaming.
GTA switching to 3D changed games. Like, it was just like, okay, you've had like your little loading screens, you go to different parts of the world, but Grand Theft Auto was like, now we're not doing that, mate. Massive open world, completely in 3D, go wherever you want, constantly. And that was games from then on in. That was like, oh, we're all going to do that now. We're all going to make loads of money. And also we're going to introduce actual Hollywood actors. We're going to have actual music that you would hear on your radio in here. It was amazing.
I mean, there's not very many games that combine open world driving and shooting that don't owe something to Grand Theft Auto 3. I mean, you go back and play it now and yeah, okay, it's pretty clunky, but there's still something in it that's kind of magical. And it sort of doesn't matter, you know, it can be as adult and grim as it likes. There is always going to be that little bit of childish wonder where you sort of get out of your car and then run around and get back in a different car and drive away. I think that essential idea is something that's going to be with games forever, and it came from that.
All of a sudden it was like an extra load of Daily Mails were sold or whatever, you know, like, oh my goodness, it's in 3D, now children are going to go around doing this. It's like, there are worse things in the world than playing video games, let's be honest, come on now.
Grand Theft Auto 3, by going into 3D, by going into real world, made it much more mature, much darker, much more immersive. You really felt like you were in a functioning city. It utterly shifted the tone of the whole series, and it set the agenda really for adult kind of orientated action adventure games for the next 10 years.
And even things, look at the way that the actual screen is built up. You've got like your life in one corner, your money in one corner, the gun you're using in one corner. That same layout has stuck, you know, 15 years later. We're still using the same thing.
So yeah, when GTA 3 moved to 3D, there were a lot of skeptical people who thought that the essence of that sort of top-down gameplay that Rockstar had created with GTA 1 and 2 and the spin-offs, that something was going to be lost there. But who could have known that they were actually on the cusp of creating one of the most, if not the most successful game series of all time.
It's another one of those games that really drew a line in the sand between Sony and Nintendo. You know, we talk about Doom defining first and third person shooters, but GTA 3 defined that open world action adventure genre. It's influenced every game that's come since it. Ubisoft definitely owe Rockstar a pint.
If you don't mess this up, maybe there'll be more work for you.
As a first-person shooter, Halo Combat Evolved doesn't seem to do anything all that different from its peers. You shoot a bunch of very similar looking alien dudes, you walk down a bunch of space corridors, you pilot some vehicles and you save the galaxy. Done. But it was in the minute details that Halo stood itself apart. It was the weightiness of those guns, how they fired, how that space combat felt, that made the slightly repetitive sequences worthwhile. And it was the story of Master Chief, John 1:17, and his relationship with AI Cortana that grounded what could have been a nonsense space opera and made it feel like something more. And of course, the multiplayer helped a little. Well, helped a lot in fact, and the Xbox's huge success is down to the game's stellar sales. The series became a sports staple, and pop culture nods like Combat Evolved inspired Machinima series Red vs. Blue cemented the Mjolnir armor's iconic status. Development of the franchise may have switched hands from Bungie to 343 Industries, but its popularity never wavered, even up to the release of Halo 5 Guardians and the return of that green armor. But Master Chief isn't the only one with a fancy suit, and to be honest, I think I'd prefer the armor belonging to this next lady. I mean, she can turn herself into a football. How cool is that?
So Metroid Prime was one of the first games I played where I really got into the idea of reading like the logs. So the scan visor was its big addition, I think, to the genre and to the franchise, which meant that you could go around the environment and you could scan, you know, if there's a body on the floor or a computer console or a plant or whatever, you could scan it. And the more that you scan things, the more you put together this feeling of the world. And I think there's been very few games where you feel really like you are exploring an alien planet.
For me, Metroid Prime is a great example of how good Nintendo could be at this sort of thing if they bother to develop these sorts of titles. I'm someone who loves cute little green dinosaurs and Captain Toad tracking his treasure, but that was a really exciting title, Metroid Prime, when it landed. We've not had that. We've not had an F-Zero in years, and everybody wants that, a proper racing game with Nintendo. And Metroid Prime's now been relegated to the 3DS. Sometimes it's almost as if Nintendo hate making money.
As you may have guessed from my progressively anime-like haircut, I like RPGs. And I get particularly charmed when RPGs hit the mainstream. The first time I saw it happen was Final Fantasy VII. Suddenly in high school, all my friends were talking about party members and levelling up. And the gorgeous Sephiroth meant teenagers had the same confusing feelings their mums and dads had had about David Bowie in the 70s, and they'd had about him in Labyrinth. So imagine my joy when in late 2004, a genuine horde of people, wink, see what I did, started talking about Warcraft. Graphical power and internet speeds were finally powerful enough for a fantasy world with the possibility of mass appeal. Ultima Online was a prototype. Second Life was just a nice idea. So successful it wiped away all memory of the original Warcraft franchise. For all of its complexities, WoW is based on 3 very simple things. 1. A character you invest in, so an ideal you who's customizable. Now, from official DLC to user customized content, character creation has become its own industry. 2. The drive to make numbers higher, since everything can level up. Is this fireball more powerful than that fireball? Well, it must be. It's got more numbers. From microtransactions all the way to people you can pay to just do the grind for you, leveling up has become an industry too. And 3. It's more fun to play with all your friends. This is a game with such a wide community, it had the first instances of genuine plagues in a 3D fantasy world. Now, not viruses, genuine, bug in the game, game-breaking plagues. Blizzard has created a fantasy universe so big it doesn't just have elves, it has epidemics. And what that means for the future, I can't wait to find out. Break time now. Tweet at us your picks of the most influential games of the 2000s at #VGN. Like the Video Game Nation Facebook page, and we will see you in just a minute.
I'm battling him on the stage right now for who's the best at the guitar. Who's not going to want that?
Shoot! Oh, no. End is near. I see the light. Oh.
Welcome back. I'm going to go off on a rant here. The 2000s represent the last time that I felt that I could go on the internet and not just be immersed in a deluge of hype for the latest variation on an idea that somebody had 20 years ago, that they've just added an extra graphical update, an extra number in the title, and now I'm meant to be tremendously excited. I don't have the time or the blood pressure to hear all that nonsense. I only want 2 things. 1, innovation, and 2, fun games. And if a franchise must churn out titles year after year, then maybe people could just talk about them if they actually do something new and good for the series. Otherwise, ignore it, because you can encourage new ideas by not buying half-finished, by-the-numbers dreck. The next few games we're going to discuss represented the best of that kind of thinking. For a while, then they just kept making them. But here's the apex of a franchise.
I think Resident Evil 4 really took the survival horror genre sort of to the next level, but a bit like with Super Mario 64 really. Resident Evil 4 was a great example of a company going, maybe we can do something fresh with this franchise and with this genre, and let's do something bold.
It was just a really nice kind of merging of third-person action-adventure gameplay with first-person shooting gameplay. And it was so important. Even just that switch in camera angle, and this is the genius of Shinji Mikami, because he sensed this. I think he sensed the world of games was changing away from that tension of survival horror towards action.
So Resi 4 as a third-person shooter really slowed things down. It made you pause to aim. It created a sense of tension and danger every time you had to take your gun out, because you were rooted to the spot in many ways. You were vulnerable to attack. It really forced you to choose between running away or facing your enemies.
People bemoan it, but these tank controls, I love the tank controls. Like, the tank controls are what makes that game feel so powerful. When you walk into a room and you're surrounded by this horde of zombies, and then you stop and you aim and you take your shot, and then you're getting surrounded, so you stop aiming and you start stepping backwards, or you start like just jogging in the other direction. And there's this feeling of like you've got to have the right place in the room, and you've really got to like know where you are. And it's funny because it's almost like the still equivalent of Doom. Like if Doom was about how quickly you can move from space to space in a shooter, Resident Evil 4 was about how quickly you could get to a place and stay there and then shoot everything.
Yeah, Resident Evil 4 was my trump card. Like, whenever anybody told me that the GameCube was rubbish, I could just put that on, and that'd shut them up. It didn't stop me getting bullied, but it certainly deferred it.
I don't think I'm the only person that thinks the Resident Evil series went a little bit downhill after 4. If you think about it, 4 was the sweet spot between what the series used to be, puzzle solving and zombie dodging all alone in creepy locales, and what it is now, an all guns blazing action fest in which you have an ally tailing you almost every step of the way. But enough of that buzzkill attitude, how about something a little more fun? Do you remember when we all thought we could be rock stars? I hope you kept your plastic guitars handy.
Guitar Hero for me was the first sort of true social game, because it was a game you could play at parties, you know, and people wanted to play. I think non-gamers are often sort of almost quite frightened of picking up a regular controller. You know, they're scared of getting it wrong, but everyone can pick up a guitar, and you know, everyone's played air guitar, and everyone kind of basically can get that idea.
So with the arrival of Guitar Hero, I think the notion of the party games just suddenly came back to the fore. Like, it went away for a while. Like, for the longest time, I don't remember being able to bring friends over to have a sort of a fun party experience where a game was the centerpiece of that. But that plastic guitar, like, you saw it, you wanted to pick it up and play with it straight away.
Guitar is like a massive phenomenon, mostly because you could pretend to be a rock star. Sure, you had a tiny little stupid looking plastic guitar with like big colourful buttons on the end of it, and like people would go, and it didn't look cool. The music goes off, you feel like a bit of an idiot. But while that music's on, you're like, mate, I am Slash. This is amazing. I'm battling him on the stage right now for who's the best at the guitar. Who's not going to want that?
There was something so social about it, because if you were playing, there was just a cool soundtrack and music on in the background, so other people could be around you not playing, and it wasn't like, oh god, they're playing video games. It was like, no, it's cool, it's fine. Listen to the Rolling Stones, they're playing a video game, it's all good.
It allowed us to perform in front of our friends. You could get you can get a bunch of people around, get your guitar out, get your Guitar Hero out, and you could spend hours just messing around in the same way that people play, love to go to karaoke at a pub. It was that same thing of being able to show off and perform, even in just a small way.
Games in the noughties were always looking to try and really kind of find new audiences and target on new audiences. And Guitar Hero is a perfect example of one particular genre that was previously kind of untouched until they had the technology, they got the guitar working, they got the buttons, they got the configurations, all that kind of stuff. And although it was, it's evolved since then, it's much better now, I think that really did create a wave for future kind of games to come.
For a good 3 decades, the progression of console technology seemed assured. They become more powerful, their interface is more complex, and their controllers more convoluted. Onwards and upwards. That all changed in 2006 when Nintendo decided to go its own way with the Wii. The Wii was barely more powerful than its GameCube predecessor, came with a simple remote-like controller, and had a name that screamed #1 for all the wrong reasons. In the face of the technically superior Xbox 360 and PS3, Wii should have been an unmitigated disaster, but Nintendo had an ace up its sleeve, and a birdie, and a home run, and a strike, and a knockout. Wii Sports was little more than a compilation of very basic, very accessible activities, but as a demonstration of the Wiimote's motion tracking abilities, it was devastatingly effective. Suddenly, members of the household who'd sworn off gaming were clamoring for a go. Not only that, but they started winning. While most games had lost sight of the fact that controllers were making the relationship between the actions of the player and the actions on screen ever more abstract, Wii Sports recreated real-life motions almost one for one. It was the perfect demonstration of the Wii's disruptive attitude and single-handedly propelled gaming back into the mainstream, not to mention hundreds of Wiimotes into expensive TV screens. At the last count, Wii Sports has sold nearly 83 million copies, making it the most successful console game of all time. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a game that ushered in the era of AAA gaming and turned the ghillie suit into a must-have fashion accessory.
For me, Modern Warfare wasn't just the turning point in that series, it was the turning point where games started to be properly comparable to movies, not just in terms of production values, but in terms of the launches, the marketing, and the perception of non-gamers of what those things were. You know, mates who'd only ever really played FIFA and things like that started to get pulled back into gaming. It completely changed the landscape of what gaming was to non-gamers.
Modern Warfare not only changed like how you do a single-player campaign in these first-person shooters, in as much as I'm not going to spoil it for everyone, but there's a good few moments that you totally don't see coming because it messes with your expectations of what the narrative's going to do. But online, it completely changed how you're going to play. Like, it added all the leveling systems and all the perks and stuff like that you were getting in there. That had never been in that sort of a game quite as perfectly as they managed to get it in there. And that's how first-person shooters are now online. You expect the leveling systems, you expect the perks, but it was that brought it in.
It's basically the gaming equivalent of Black Ops Down, which I think, you know, let's face it, really works. I mean, you may not like COD now, but at the time, Modern Warfare was like, it was pretty much the perfect shooter. Not since, I think, GoldenEye had someone got, you know, certainly 4-player split-screen shooters as good.
The whole single-player campaign, full of explosions, full of cinematic bravado, really exciting, great characters. It just pushed you, thrusted you from one ridiculous climatic set piece to another in just a really frenzied way. In fact, they really thought about this sense of like non-stop action in which you are a cog in this incredible machine of war.
Braid was the very first sort of independent game that really went big on Xbox Live. It almost sort of made Xbox Live as a platform, and that then put in the mindset that you're going to be able to find these small games. Like, people were searching them out on the dashboard, like hungry for more stuff like that, because lower price point and an amazing game that's telling a different narrative, something you haven't seen before. So people were really hungry to find this new amazing stuff.
It was a sharp, professionally developed indie game with no the sort of rough edges that you associate with indie games on PC. They just weren't there. This was a game that was developed to perfection and completion, amazing mechanics, and just an incredible success on Xbox.
Ever since then, you know, the floodgates have opened, and now you've got what is essentially the new wave of indie gaming, which is this whole like artistic movement now. Like, you know, we're far enough away from it to go, actually, there's this big chunk of time, there's all these titles, and they're all doing what Braid did.
What Braid did was say, you can take a game with quite simple graphics, imbue them with lots of subjective, weird touches, and then produce a story which is meaningful, which is deep, which has personality, which says something about the creator. Like, these were like kind of revolutionary at the time for games on consoles.
Time bending wasn't new, but a melancholy air, an ambiguous story, and an independent studio were a great treat for the gaming industry. All art forms eventually learn new tricks, and gaming had finally learned how to take little dusty things like a 2D platformer and use them to tell new kinds of stories. Next week, we wrap up our 4-part retrospective with the decade we're actually in. Tweet at us at #VGN, like the Video Game Nation Facebook page, and I will see you next week.
Tonight you'll be hitting the jackpot, striking gold. Well, what I'm trying to say is you'll hit bullseye at 8:05 on Challenge.